As many of you know, I was away last week. For the last 10 days, I was on the East Coast. We were in Boston, New York City, and Rhode Island. When we were in New York City, we had a tourist day, walking through Central Park, going to a Broadway show, just sort of feeling how the other half lives, or the other 3/4, whatever it might be. And we went to dinner by going to Whole Foods, which is in the basement of some mall there. I never knew where we were because I never needed to know where we were, so I just saved the space in my brain for things that I needed to know. So anyway, we were there, and it was a basement sort of thing, and so not surprisingly, it was filled with people, which is what New York City is, filled with people. And there was a group of actually about 16 of us who finally went into the theater. And before, when we were having dinner, 2 other gentlemen joined us who couldn't join us for the evening, but just dropped in. And as they were getting to leave, because I wasn't going to see them again, one after the other, they asked me to bless them. So there we are in Whole Foods, and there's lots of other people around. But people only think it's odd because they don't do it. It's nothing inherently odd, so I sort of, both of them were big men like this, so I just did the blessing. There's this other gal sitting over here wearing people wear t-shirts with all these words on them. It was some variation on the word dude, and it just kind of had all these U's in it. I had seen her because she was right close to us, and she was watching us, and sort of afterwards, she comes up to me, and she's from somewhere in Eastern Europe. She seemed to have the voice seemed to be Russian. "Who are you?" She says to me. I said, "Nobody in particular." "Then what are you doing?" "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, these are my friends, and I weren't going to see them for a long time. They asked me to bless them." "I want one too." Her name was Anna, and she was very intent, so, why not? And I just prayed that whatever it was that she was trying to find, Master would help her to find it. What else can you do? Walking in a place as big and as crowded as New York City, you realize how many agendas human beings have. And going through Central Park, which is how New Yorkers, I think, stay sane, is because it's this huge area. There was there was a whole school there. I later heard it was a Waldorf school, but just all this school, and the children were playing, and they had organized some relay races, and we sat down to chant and meditate, but honestly, I completely forgot that we were chanting and meditating because I was so absorbed in the kids' relay races and all the different personalities of the children, and the fact that it was set up slightly unfairly because 2 of the teams had to run longer and farther uphill, and they were always behind. I heard the group was chanting, "Oh God, beautiful." And I honestly, only later did I realize, I heard the chanting, not as chanting, but as the soundtrack for the kids' relay over here. So much so that when we stopped to meditate, and the team that was ahead that I was rooting for, the last runner slipped. And in the middle of the meditation, I go, "Oh no," like that. Fortunately, there was a lot of other noise and nobody was noticing, but it was like, I would be exaggerating to say that it was like Narada when he was sent off by Krishna to get a cup of water, and he falls in love and has a whole life for 12 years before he remembers that he's supposed to come back and give Krishna the cup of water. Most of you know the story, but it was Narada asking, "What is Maya? I don't understand. I have such a clear love for God, such a clear relationship with you, Lord. What happens to people?" And so then he goes off to get the water, and he goes to the little village, and the door is opened by the most beautiful woman he's ever seen, and suddenly they feel their soul connection, and 12 years later, that's what happened. "Oh," Narada says, "now I get it." So I'm there with all our crowd of devotees, people from Ananda village, from New York, from Rhode Island, from Boston. We're all sort of smushing around, walking through Central Park. And everybody is doing something. There's not one human being there who wasn't busy being himself or herself. So completely absorbed in the individual destiny. And you see all the little babies, and I met Arlo. Arlo was 3 months old, being held by his mother. I never asked his mother's name. I was only interested in Arlo. Poor little Arlo, you know, how little kids are at that age. And I'm just looking at this child and thinking, how much karma is here? And it wouldn't do me any good to sort of explain to Arlo or to his mother that what you're really seeking is God, that really none of this is going to ever fulfill you, and just all of those pieces. It would just be pointless. I know it's pointless because I know myself. You know, at a much earlier stage in the spiritual life, I thought you could just say that to someone. Oh, by the way, just, you know, give up all your desires, change everything that you think, and just become something that you'll have no hope of becoming. You know, not now, not yet. Everybody just has to run this story. And it's so confusing. It's just the only word for it. It's just so confusing that we try to find simplicity by grabbing hold of some external picture that'll make it work right. But our own karma just pushes us time after time after time. There was a moment in Ananda's history a couple of decades ago, when I had in front of me a list of pretty much everybody who'd ever come through our communities. This was, I think, in the early 90s, like this. And so it was quite a long number. And I'd been there, not quite since day one, but since day 2. So I knew everybody. And there were a lot of those people who have gone on to do other things with their lives. But it was so interesting to me, with 1 or 2 exceptions, it was clear to me that all of those people belonged somewhere else. And I don't mean that not even in a slightly judgmental way, but even when they were enthusiastically living in our community, if you were sensitive, you could feel that there was other karmas that were going to not make it quite so easy. Many of you have heard me tell the story of the satsang that Swami Kriyananda gave here. Some of you were there. We have our 2 religious orders. One of them is a lay order, essentially, and the other is a monastic order. And it's not about how much you love God or how clearly you're following your own destiny. It's just your karma. You know, being in New York, being on this, and in Boston also, being with so many people that I hadn't known before, again, it becomes obvious to me that we all follow what's moving us inside. And what seems so natural to me, they were so many people were so interested in things that I just wasn't interested in. Of course, you have to be a good guest, you have to be polite. I always have an intense anticipation of not liking New York City, and I like New York City. I don't think I would want to live there, but it's dynamic, people are awake. It's not like, it's different than here, but it's the same reason that I like it here. People are dynamic, people are awake, there's creativity, there's enthusiasm, there's just like, it's not boring, people are not low energy. But they want many different things. I mean, you read about how saints look at us and they just see us, just all these oscillating desires. And they're very sympathetic. If they're true teachers, they're very sympathetic. It's not that they scold us for this. And the Bhagavad Gita is so emphatic. Better to die doing your own dharma, to fail at your own dharma, than to try to live somebody else's. So the spiritual path just becomes this very interesting, the power of how we live properly on the path is not that we don't live or that we don't allow our destiny to unfold, The power of it is that we understand that we're doing it with God, that we're just watching it unfold. There we are. I arrive in this scene. I haven't been to the Northwest. All of this is like just before the pandemic. I had all these plans, and they all just sat there until now. We did the 100th anniversary of Master arriving in Boston, except it's the 102nd anniversary. Because on the 100th, everybody was at home. And you walk in and people see you the way they think that you are. Swami Kriyananda, at the end of his life, used to joke about this so much. I was starting to tell the story about the lay order and the Sevak order. He used to joke about this so much because the longer his life went on, the more laudatory the praise got, the more, the more the anticipation and the drum rolls and the whole thing. And then he would always say, and then this little mouse would come out on the stage. That's how he always described himself. Of course, we didn't see him that way. But in the midst of it, he said to me once, he said, the longer I live, the more I feel the myth of Swami Kriyananda swirling around me. That's how he put it. He said, but I know in the midst of it, I'm just the same old guy. Same old guy as when he was 2 years old, 4 years old. But the myth of our own reality, now of course he was a revered and an honored human, but all of us, the myth of our own reality is swirling around us. And the art is not to repudiate that, because you can't stop it. This is again where the Gita is so confusing. You cannot get out of action by inaction. All those ones, inaction is an action, and it goes on, and you have to spend a long time trying to figure it out. But the point is, if you try to repress who we actually are, that just doesn't take you anywhere either. It just builds up tension till it explodes. If we try to just be from the outside. But at the same time, it's very unfortunate if we also just lose track of the fact that we're just visitors here, we're just passing through. And there is a truth within us that just keeps going. And that's when it talks about surrender and victory, which is really just wonderful ideas. It's we're just always so worried. When we become devotees, we get to worry about whether we're doing the right thing. Other people just live. There was a child who grew up at Ananda village, a couple of girls who grew up at Ananda village but never embraced our path. And they were lamenting, what was overheard on the telephone, lamenting to one another, all our friends, meaning the people who didn't grow up in a spiritual community, just get to do whatever they want. And then the two girls, Ananda girls, said to each other, but the way we were raised, we always have to think about the deeper meaning of what we do. And yeah, that is our burden, isn't it? We always have to think about the deeper meaning. And it's not just what we do, but it's the consciousness with which we do it. And what we have to surrender is our little ideas of what we think. I've been so impressed recently, it's just come to me, how often, and I've said this here, how often, people just hold on to a point of view. In the area that I am, there's competing sports teams. So in addition to everything else, people get to talk about which sports team is the best sports team. I remember seeing a man with a tattoo on the back of his leg, for whatever baseball or basketball team he was in favor of. But I thought, this is like, from his point of view, I'm as crazy as he is. This is what Master said. We all just hang out with people who have the same craziness, and so we don't realize how arbitrary our point of view is. There's the words surrender, Swami, he does use that word and he uses it often. But at the same time, on other occasions, he's protested against it completely, because he talks about it as if you surrender only when you have no other choice. It's not a conscious act of courageous will. It's considered to be a divine defeat. And so we get very confused. But what we're really talking about is we take possession of the self that we are, and we constantly hold it up to the light. We constantly ask the question, what is the deeper meaning here? And we also just have to have this very calm acceptance that we have karma. That's just really what it comes down to. We have karma with people, we have karma with our own bodies, we have karma with our desires, and it's just going to lead us through this valley of whatever is. And there's no shortcut. The Bible verse where Jesus is about to be crucified, and of course when you're reading the Bible, you know the end of the story. So you know that when Jesus is there at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's asking his disciples to pray with him for a few hours, and they can't stay awake. And as Swami writes, they must have just bitterly lamented that they're in such a critical moment, their hearts failed them, not once but twice, or is it 3 times? He pleads with them to pray, he leaves them on their own, he comes back and finds them sound asleep. But there's also something so realistic about that. And it's not just, you see, we think our power and our pleasing of God comes from the success that we have. But really, the greater challenge is just to accept our limitations, just be exactly what we are. And I'm not that good. I want to be that good, I aspire to be that good, but I'm not that good. Just, that's it. Beginning, middle, end of the story. Swami's words to me. So much for theory, let's deal with reality. And the satsang I was beginning to speak of was when Swami was talking to the lay order, which is, the lay order is people who have more complicated, more involved karma. The monastic order is self-evident. It's like there aren't that many things to do outside of this particular narrow focus. It doesn't mean, and this is what we're always working with, that one is even more ahead of the other. It just means it's what I have to work on, what I came to work on in this life. And in that satsang with the lay members, Swami had asked me what he should talk about, and I said, we're always trying to get people to be comfortable where they are. Please talk to people about what it means to be a lay member. So then Swami gives this long story about getting thrown out of SRF and being a monk who'd given his life to God and having to live with his parents and then having to participate in the world. And then his father gave him a car. And Swami did not cry very often at the time, in public, at the time that this happened. And he looked at us and he said, I can't tell you how painful it was for me to accept that car. He said, but I needed it. I couldn't just let my father keep supporting me. I had to accept it. And then he began to weep. But to have to own something like a car again, essentially. And, we're just, deer in the headlights. We just were watching this story in front of us, and all of us are hoping that we can get a car, and so proud if we have one. And he's weeping because he had to own one. So then the satsang is sort of over, and Swami turns to me and he said, well, is there anything else that I should talk about? I said, why don't you talk to them about what it means to be a lay member? Swami looked at me very seriously. That's all I have been talking about, he said. I mean, the dots were not connected in my mind. And then he looked at the room, which is still deer in the headlights, He just says, don't even think about living the way I live. He said, you could never do it, and it's not even appropriate for you to try. That was how he explained what it meant to be a lay member, right? But he was right. Don't even think about being somebody that you're not. And then, the corollary of that is Jesus comes and sees his poor sleeping disciples. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. We have an aspiration. We will reach that aspiration, but the only way we can reach it is step by step. The image I always use is the apple seed becomes an apple tree, and no stage can be skipped. And so wherever we're standing, but what we have to do is we have to turn our faces toward the light, so that whatever we're walking through, be it family, be it money, be it desire for, aspiration, ambition, whatever it might be, our feet are where our karma is going to put us. But we can always turn our faces toward the light. Even those disciples who couldn't stay awake, they didn't love Jesus less. It wasn't because they didn't love Jesus. It was that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And we have to be as impersonal about ourselves as, Swami was talking about. The myth of Kriyananda swirls around him, but he just remains the same. When Anna of New York City asked me, who are you? It's like, I just couldn't think of an answer. I don't know. I'm just the one who just wanders around inside this body and people recognize her face. I didn't know what to say. I'm just nobody in particular. Then why are they asking you, like that? It wasn't the time for a long philosophical dissertation. But those were good questions. Who are you? Why are you living the way you live? Why did people ask me to bless them? They haven't seen me in a long time. I knew Swami Kriyananda. There are many things I could have said. But really, the truth was, who are you? I'm nobody in particular. Because really, none of us are anybody in particular, and all of us are God incarnate. You just can't make it work with your mind. That's why in surrender lies victory. And we're not just surrendering like, I want this, and no, I give it to you. We see it all like this. The surrender is just any pretense that we have a clue. My whole, as all of you know, as I've talked to you, my life pattern is shifting. I don't know where it's going to go. And I knew something had to change. And I just started saying yes. And I started getting lots of people asking me to do things that they hadn't asked me to do before. And so I said yes. And sometimes I've said no. There were a few things that were asked that just didn't feel exactly right. But then all of a sudden, your karma takes you somewhere. And you look and see, what am I doing? Oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. You can depend on it. Whatever you're doing, that's what you're supposed to do. Either because you need to stop doing it now and do something else, but we're moving. The divine is moving us. And the more we can watch that and feel that and keep our faces to the light, the more powerful it will be. The number of people on this planet who have a clue is a very, very small number. Go to any urban area and just watch and see what they're doing. Thank God every day that you know where the sun is coming from, where the light is. And even if you can't walk in the right direction, you can look in the right direction as you're walking in the wrong direction. Because that's more than anything, our aspiration defines us. Whatever we are now is the past. It's already the past. Swami said that once so beautifully. Anything you have already achieved, by definition, is already behind you, because we are a constant energy flow. So it doesn't matter what you have or have not done. It only matters which way you're looking. And even more deeply, what do you love? Just what do you love? Whom do you love? How do you love them? And by that I don't mean people. I mean just what do you really love? That's what, years ago I had to give a talk about devotion. And I was just thinking about it. And I realized, of course, that the origin word of that is devoted. And I really understood that devotion is not chanting or singing or dancing or anything like that. Those are expressions of it. Devotion is devoted to. And what are we devoted to? And even if we are like St. Augustine, who said, make me a saint, Lord, but not yet. But the question was, make me a saint. And so what we really want to be devoted to is just accepting whatever God has given us to do, doing it with full commitment, so that we can move on. And move on toward the light, to be devoted to. There was a child in our high school who was, as teenagers do, in our middle school, declaring herself to be an atheist, I think. And one of the teachers very intelligently said, I'm not so sure you're an atheist. I think you're seeking what's true. Meaning you're rejecting a lot, but it's not your rejection that defines you. It's what you're seeking. I'm devoted to the truth. That makes me a devotee. I'm devoted to the reality of what is. That makes me a devotee. And the victory that we're all seeking is to just live in what is with the faith that God is going to be on the other side of it. God bless you, my friends.
Friends, the world will still be there, a world of suffering, a world of care. Today we'll dance and tell the universe there's love and song for everyone. Fling joy like roses on the laughing wind, send melodies upon the air. Tell everyone that joy is theirs alone, who smile at life and call it fair.